Customer put DEF in the fuel system of the 6.7 Cummins. Look at what it does to the inside of the fuel system. Multiple Tone here, guys, and I got a 2017 2500 heavy duty with a 6.7 Cummins, and unfortunately they put DEF in the diesel. So we got to replace the entire fuel system. I'm going to show you how to do that, show you all the parts that you need. Let's get started. So you can do this multiple order, however you want to do it. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go ahead and drop the fuel tank, and then I'm going to come over here and remove both of this fuel filter assembly and the back one. And then that way I'll remove all the fuel system here, and that way I can flush all the lines back, then put the tank back after I cleaned it, and then do all this. All right, to get the fuel tank out, you're going to have two 16mm nuts, one right there and one right there, and it's going to be for these fuel tank straps right there. You're going to have a vent right here. It's a 7mm. You can get it from underneath with a wobble. The fill tube is going to be right here next to it, but you're going to disconnect that from here right on top like this, and then that will just pop up. You're going to have a vent right here. Just pop off the hose right there. And you'll have an electrical connector right here in the center and one fuel line. So there's your electrical connector right there. And your one fuel line is right there. You're going to depress the tabs, and then the clip will stay on the pump. You're going to take that out and go ahead and get this out. Now, just one thing to mention is you can see down the filler tube there, all that crystallizing. So you're going to want to clean all that off. That's from the DEF when the fuel was put into the fuel system. You're going to have a fuel filter assembly that bolts up right there. You're going to have one fuel line right there. You're going to have a connector on top and a water and fuel connector. So here's going to be your connector on top. You're going to have two 13mm nuts, water and fuel sensor right there. And then you'll have one other fuel line, this guy right here. You'll take that one out. You have to flush all this out, obviously. And then your fuel pump is going to be here. Now, it's up to you whether you replace it or not. If it was my truck, I probably would replace it. Just because if you leave any DEF in here, it'll just go in your fuel system. Hopefully it's not too much. It won't cause any damage. But this one here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it sit and dry and just keep checking it for crystals. Here's what the fuel looked like right here. The whole bottom of the tank was just one big cloudy like that. You can see how it separates. So the whole bottom of the tank was that crystal. So it's going to look like that. So what I did with the fuel tank was, so you have a short end, the back end right here. It's only from here to there. But the front is really long. You can't reach all the way up there. So what I did was I stood it on its end with this part down. Just spraying brake clean, sopping up all the fuel, spraying brake clean with rags, and just putting the rags at the bottom there. And then I tipped it. Then I stood it the other way, sprayed with brake clean, so all the crystals would hopefully kind of wash itself. And then I flipped it over, sprayed compressed air in there, and now I'm going to let it dry and just keep checking it while we work on the rest of the fuel system. You can imagine what this looks like inside your fuel system. This is inside the fuel tank. Just to give you an idea, that's how imperative that you get all of this out. So once you get your tank most of the way up, go ahead and connect your electrical connector and your fuel line on the driver's side. Then we gotta connect this line to the passenger side like that. And it comes out right here where our other fuel filter goes. Now make sure that you lubed up your two ports on your fuel pump up there. And then connect the vent right there. And then we're going to get ready to put it up. Just from sitting overnight, look at how much more def has popped out of that filter. Yesterday, it was only around the edge right here, right there. And now look at all that def. Look at the floor. This is why it is imperative that you clean this really well before you put anything back together. Look at that. This has just been dripping all night. And I got everything out. Let's take a look at the fuel tank. I cleaned this yesterday. Let's see. It's hard to tell, but you can still see a little bit of def in there, even though I cleaned out this fuel tank already. So take your time with this fuel tank. Make sure that you get it clean. Even though I've already cleaned this pump, this is why I say you may want to replace your pump, because, I mean, look at that. I've already sprayed this out with brake clean, and it's still full of def. Look at all that def. So, look at that on the screen. So I got to get all that cleaned up. Now this step is super imperative that you do this correctly. So what I did was I disconnected the two lines at the front of the truck and where it goes up to the engine and wiped them all off. And I went to the back of the truck and the two lines at the tank. What I did was I bungeed them so they were aimed straight down. And then I came up to the front and I used a red line detection connection kit. I'll put that a link down below. So it gave me a nice, easy way to connect. And what I did was I used a solvent, a pressurized solvent sprayer, and I used solvent to spray out all the lines to get all the def out. And then I blew air through it. Now you also want to make sure that you lubricate your O-rings inside the line, since we just used solvent, which is going to dry out the O-rings. And then I'm going to do the same thing on those two lines that go up to the engine. Now we got to get access to the fuel system. So we're going to go ahead and take this off. Take your upper CCV filter off. You're going to go ahead and get your dipstick out of here. Your CCV filter, there's going to be a hose connected over here, right there. You can actually leave it connected and just flip it back. You got an electrical connector here. Go ahead and disconnect that. And then we're going to be disconnecting these valve cover gasket connectors. There's one there and one back here. You do it now while the valve cover is bolted down because it's easier to get them off. Once the valve cover is unbolted, then the connectors are hard to get out. Taking off the stuff on the top of the valve cover is real easy. Just a bunch of 8s for that cover. And your CCV filter is all 8s with 2 studded bolts. So you can do this in whatever order you want to do it in. The problem is if you take the valve cover off, you have to worry about dirt and crap getting in there. But what you do need to do is, so we need to get the injection pump out of here. And we also need to get the injectors, the fuel lines, and the fuel rails, and that lower fuel filter housing. So however you want to do it, I'm going to do this all in a crazy order. I think what I'm going to probably do is go ahead and pop off all these fuel lines and the fuel rail. Keep your fuel lines in order because they're different. They're different fuel lines, so you know which one goes where, so you're not trying to figure it out. So I'm going to get all this off, then we'll worry about that pump. You need to disconnect the batteries. Go ahead and disconnect both batteries because this is a fuel heater right here. It's an intake air heater, and we got to disconnect this. It's going to be going over here to your solenoid. So we're going to go ahead and disconnect that. And you got to take off. So what we got to do is take off this metal bracket here. You got some harnesses clipped to it. We got to take off the top clamp or loosen up the top clamp. And we got to take out these bolts here that are bolting down this air horn here. You're going to have to undo this EGR pipe right there. So you got to undo this and lift this up because you can't get this, you can't get down here. You can't get this torqued properly with this in the way. So we're going to go ahead and take this little air horn off of here and get it out of the way. Fan shroud needs to come off next. There's going to be 4 T30s. The bottom one on the driver's side is a pain in the butt to get out. Once you get those out, there's a rubber seal between the fan shroud and where the fan clutch is. And then you have 4 13mm nuts. Once the fan shroud's out of the way, now we got to do the fan clutch. If you have an air hammer kit, it breaks the fan clutch loose real good. There'll be a link down below to that kit right there. Once that's out of the way, the fan clutch is going to have a connector as well. Once that's out of the way, you got to remove the cover for the high pressure pump nut, and that's a 3/8 drive. There's also a gasket that likes to stick to the cover. Don't lose it. Put it back in your little cover here. Next up is the EGR tube and the air horn. EGR tube is going to have 2 clamps and 2 gaskets. The air horn is going to have some bolts around the perimeter and a CAC tube. Once your fuel rail and all your fuel lines are out, you got to undo the connector tube nuts, and they are 24 millimeter. They're going to break loose and they should unthread very easily. Then you're going to pop out your connector tubes just like that. It's real easy. Pair of pliers pops them right out. And your banjo bolt's going to be 17 millimeter. Then go ahead and get your fuel rail out. You got a sensor back there that's going to be a connector, and that'll come on your new fuel rail. So we've got a fuel line right there where the red cap is. We've got a fuel line right there. We've got an electrical connector right there and an electrical connector right there. We got 3 bolts. So to make the fuel filter housing easier, the one fuel line in the front is really hard to get to. Just disconnect it here at the high pressure pump. Because we're going to have to disconnect it anyways, and we'll just bring it out together. And now we just have to get the one off the back and get the bolts out. You're going to go ahead and undo this one from the high pressure pump, and then this mounts to a junction block on the side of the block. High pressure pump nut is 27 millimeter. You're going to take a 27 millimeter and a long ratchet, put it on there, and you should be able to just hit the ratchet with a dead blow. It should break loose. Now there's a washer behind the nut. So you've got 3 nuts down here you got to take out. But to get the gear popped off the pump down here, you got to use a little puller like this. This is like a little steering wheel puller. Sometimes you can just hit the tip of the pump and get it to pop. On this one, I just couldn't get it to pop, so I got it set up here. And I'm going to it just takes a little bit, and it's going to pop loose, and then the pump is going to come out the back. So the pump doesn't really want to come out. You don't have a lot of room. So there's a PCM connector down there. There's an 8 milli bolt on both sides, securing the harness to the block. You got to take those 2 8 millis out, push in the red pin, the red dot down there, and then push the gray lever down, and then the connector will move, and then we can get this pump out. I got the valve cover off now. There's going to be 4 10 millis inside where the CCV filter is, and 2 at the back. So when you try to take your valve cover off, your gasket's going to be stuck to your valve cover probably. Well, the valve cover has wires running through it, hence the connectors. So we need to stick a screwdriver through here and break the seal loose between the valve cover and the gasket. The gasket has to stay down because we have to unbolt all the injector wires. So now to get the gasket out, we have all these little nuts here. They're attached to the wires. So they're going to be 7 millimeter. And we're going to undo them off of all the injectors, make sure they're free, and then we'll lift this gasket up out of here, and we'll work on getting these injectors out. Now we need to take off the rear rocker arm. So what you got to be careful of on rocker arms is that the tip doesn't fall off of the rocker arms. Sometimes when they get worn, they'll fall out, and then you'll have big problems. So we got to take off the rear rocker arm so we can get to the 2 bolts, and then the other one's right underneath this. So we're going to take that off, and the bridge. There's a bridge here that connects the 2 valves. It's 2 valves intake, 2 valves exhaust, connected by 1 bridge. So here's what your rocker arms look like right there. Here's the little nub on the end. Make sure that stays on. And then there's your valve bridge. Make sure that your push rods don't stick to your rocker arm, and take them out all like that, 10 millis. Then you're going to go through and take out all the 8 milli bolts for the injectors, 2 per injector. Got to pop the injectors out. It's incredibly easy on this. You just find a flat spot and a screwdriver, and you can pop them right out. Now we got the injectors out, the high pressure pump, the rails, the tank. Everything is out. Now it's time to clean and get ready. So now that I've got all the holes clean, I went ahead and shoved a rag in every hole and shoved it clean to make sure that nothing gets down into my cylinders. And now it's time to clean. Now let me show you. So everything here is getting replaced. The fuel rail, not these connecting tubes. We'll have to clean those. But I mean, look at what the injectors look like. Look at that. You want to make sure your copper washers come out with all your injectors. Now, some years have what's called IQA codes, which is injection quantity adjustment codes. And that's how the fuel injectors are able to be fine-tuned to make these things run so darn good. Now, they're on top of the injectors whenever they're there. Now, if you have to have the IQA codes, you have to write them down before you put them into the truck. Once you put the injectors in the truck, it's really hard to read the codes. And once you're all done, you have to go into the PCM and program all the IQA codes. Track of that. But, so here's what the fuel looked like in the tank. We got a few fuel lines we'll be replacing, but like these, we'll need to spray all these out and clean them. Here's what the inside of the fuel filter housing looks like, just to give you an idea what DEF does to the fuel system. Look at that. You're not cleaning that. Even the filter. Look at the filter. So here's your fuel tubes that you're going to need. You're going to need one of these. You're going to need two of these. You're going to need one of these. And you're going to need two of these. You're going to need this right here. That's the fuel rail. And that comes with the sensor on the end. And then you're going to need this right here, which is a set of 6 injectors right there. You're going to need this guy right here. This is the fuel pump O-ring. You'll need that right there for your intake manifold. So that right there, that TDC, that has to be at 12 o'clock. This is the balancer before we put the high pressure pump in. So the way you're going to do that is there's a plate right back there on the transmission, right above the oil pan. There's 2 10-millimeter bolts. You're going to take those out. And you're going to need one of these. This is an engine barring tool for a Cummins. There's the Matco number. I'll find one that's not Matco because obviously Matco doesn't make this. But you put this in and then you rotate this and that turns the engine. And you're going to do that until that TDC is at 12 o'clock before we put the high pressure pump in. So the plate, if you just loosen up both of the bolts, the plate will rotate out of the way. And it's that left hole there. And we're going to put that tool in there, and that's going to roll the engine over. And you can use a setup like this. Just put a 3/8 wobble up there, a long extension, and I just adapted it to a 1/2 inch. I had a 1/2 inch ratchet. And now from the front, I can rotate it over, and I put a mark on the front of the balancer, so that way when that pink mark is straight up and down, I know it's at 12 o'clock, and I don't have to drop the vehicle down to look. All right, so once you've rolled the engine over and you've confirmed that the TDC here right there is at 12 o'clock, all right, it doesn't matter whether it's on, it doesn't matter which stroke it's on, as long as the TDC is at the top. Then we're going to come over here and on the end of the shaft, you're going to see a number. And in this one here, I don't know if you're about to see it in the camera, it says 754. Anyways, you can see the 5 right there in the middle. That doesn't matter. So what you got to do is it's either going to say 750 or 754. So what you want to do is you want to take the number of the 5 in between the two. So 750 or 754. So the 5. And on the other side, on mine, there's a 2 here and 754 here. So you're going to go with a straight line from 2 to 5. And it needs to be halfway between this right here. So it needs to be lined up. And so what I did was I just held a wrench like this from the 2 to the 5, and I kind of just looked at it. I can't do it with the light here, but you can see it's about in the center. So anyways, so once you get that in the center, lined up with here, You're going to go ahead and make sure that this shaft is completely dry. No nicks, no burrs, no brake fluid, no oil, no nothing. You're going to lubricate this O-ring right here. And then we're going to slide the pump on the studs and we're going to go through the gear. All right, I can't really show you this in the car, but I'm just going to explain it. So we're going to put the pump in and we're going to put the 3 nuts on the back, finger tight. Then right here, it says, do not tighten the nuts unless this flange right here is completely flush with the gear housing. Once you get the pump up, you're going to install the washer and the nut on the shaft, and you're going to only go finger tight. Then you're going to do a preliminary light tightening of the shaft nut. You're going to tighten the 3 injection pump mounting nuts to 18 foot-pounds. Then you're going to do the nut on the injection pump to 77 foot-pounds. And then we're going to put the cover on, and that's 71 inch-pounds. Now, this is important. Do not just push that pump up and try to tighten these nuts. You want to do it in this order so you don't damage the gear housing. Do like that. Pause the screen. Take a screenshot. So before you try to put your pump in, push your gear all the way in. And as you wiggle the pump like this, just keep pressure on the gear and then it will eventually go through. Otherwise, what will happen is your gear will do this and it will cockeye and it won't go through the gear. So you've got to keep the gear flat and then it will go through. You can get these nuts almost all the way. You can get this flange almost all the way up. Get the nuts, put them on as tight as you can, finger tight. Put your washer and your nut on here, finger tight. Torque these nuts to 18 foot-pounds. Then you're going to torque that to 77 foot-pounds. Now, what you have to do is you can't turn the engine over with the bolts on the balancer, but if you use a 15 millimeter deep socket and a long ratchet, you can apply just enough pressure this way to hold the engine steady while you torque that nut. Otherwise, it's going to roll the engine. So then once you get that to 77 foot-pounds, we're going to put that little cover on. And do not forget at this point to put your PCM connector back on if you had to take it off. And put those 2 little bolts holding the connector, holding the wiring, the harness in place. You do have to take this fitting off of your old pump and clean it and put it on your new pump. So make sure you clean it really well. Lube up your O-ring. So I'm going to put this on next because once the fuel rail's on, you'll have stuff in the way. Since we sprayed out those fuel lines and with brake clean and everything else, the seals are dry. So lube up both of your spots where your lines are going to slide on so it doesn't tear the O-rings. And remember, it's 2 10s on the front, 1 on the back, a connector here, and a connector down there. Go ahead and get this on, get all the fuel lines connected here. So the line that goes from the filter housing to the injection pump, I believe, there's the part number right there. We're going to be replacing this line right here. And that's the part number right there. Just want to make sure that your copper washers are on all the injectors. So this is your port right there. This is where your connector tube goes into. So this is where this connects right there like that. So remember, all of our connector tubes went through here. So that opening needs to be facing this direction, that way. So what you're going to do, you go ahead and lube up this O-ring right there with some clean engine oil. And then you're going to put your little hat on top of there, this thing right here with the tapered side down. You're going to set it in there and get the bolt started. And then push the injector down so it seats. You're going to take your connecting tube, this thing right here, and you're going to put it in that way. Lube up the O-ring with clean engine oil. Make sure that these are really clean. And now you should be able to push these in almost all the way just with your finger. So you can see if you look real closely, you'll see it pop in. Right there, just went in. Once they're all in, you're going to take your nut that goes onto this connector tube You're going to go ahead and thread it on by hand. All right, recap, because all I did was talk about the specs. So you're going to put all your injectors in. Make sure the intake port is facing that way. You're going to push them all down, get the 2 bolts, and just pull the injector down to where it's snug. Then loosen the bolts up. All you're doing is pulling the injector down to seat it. Then lube up your O-rings and push all your connector tubes in all the way. They should pop in. Then put your connector tube nuts on. You're going to tighten all these nuts to 132 inch-pounds. Then you're going to torque your intake bolts to 71 inch-pounds. Both bolts go evenly because it's a rocker. And so if you tighten down one side too much, it'll be like this. So make sure you torque it even. So 71 inch-pounds on the injector bolts. Then you're going to torque these nuts here, 41 foot-pounds. Now, I can tell you this, make sure you torque these. I can't tell you how many Cummins I've had with drivability problems because these nuts were loose and not torqued in the first place. So torque those. Then you're going to put your rockers back on. Make sure that your push rods, your rockers go into your push rods. You're going to torque your rockers to 27 foot-pounds. Then we're going to put the fuel rail in. All right, so I was working on this yesterday. I almost forgot. Make sure you go ahead and clean this gasket surface before you put your fuel rail in here because it's in the way, and it just makes it easier to clean. So go ahead and get it all scraped off. Make sure nothing falls down there. And also grab this post right here and make sure it doesn't wiggle. Because this, on these intake manifolds, I'm not sure what years, but on the other side of this is a nut. And I don't know if it's the older style or the newer style, but that nut falls off and destroys the engine. So make sure that this is solid, because that's your B positive for your intake heater. So let's get this clean, and then we're going to set the fuel rail in there. Once you put your fuel rail in, this bolt right here was for the oil drain tube, the dipstick right here. That sits up here and it bolts through. Hook up your connector at the back before you do anything else. And then what I advise you to do is to put the back fuel line on first. It is the hardest to get on torque-wise. So go ahead and get that on, and we're going to torque those to 30 foot-pounds. And then this banjo right here, and this banjo right here, that one right there, 18 foot-pounds. Now that we've got all the fuel tubes connected and everything, now we're going to go ahead and put our valve cover gasket, put our valve cover on, because then we got to put the silencer on here. So we got to finish getting all the wires run. We got to put the intake on and get everything bolted up so we can move this away. And the last step, we got to connect this high pressure connection right here to the high pressure pump. Go ahead and get your gasket in, and then make sure that your little wires are between these two little plastic channels. They're 13 inch-pounds. If you have a torque wrench that goes that low, or just snug them. Then once you get that in, we're going to go ahead and put this valve cover on. Going to slide that in. And the valve cover bolts are 18 foot-pounds. So when you put your valve cover on, when you put this insulator on, you have to kind of finagle it by this PCV port right here. But what you want to do is you want to go ahead and get all your harness and everything, all your little fresh air tubes pulled this way. Go ahead and get your line for your high pressure pump right there. Go ahead and get that run, and then pull everything back so you can put this insulator in. Once you get the insulator in, now it's time to go ahead and connect all your harnesses up here. Get all that connected. Then we got to put this intake on. When you're at the end and you're connecting all the connectors and putting your silencer over all the fuel tubes and all that, you want to make sure that you kind of fit it all in as you go to make sure that you don't connect stuff you don't have to disconnect. Once you get that all done, should be good to go. Now just be patient when you're cranking this thing over at the end, because it's going to take a while to get it to start. It'll start to blurp and blurp and blurp and blurp, and then it'll go more and more and more, and then it'll fire. So just be patient. That's how you replace a fuel system in a 6.7 Cummins. Thanks for watching the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.